Suppose for one moment that you have a disease that might kill you. Now suppose there is a cure that you hear about for that disease, so you call your doctor. Doctor, is this true that by taking a pill once a day for a few weeks, I could be cured forever? Yes, the doctor says, this is a fantastic medical breakthrough, but I'm really sorry, I can't prescribe it to you. It's a very expensive drug, and you're only at early stage of the disease. You're not sick enough yet. Imagine if that was your situation, how would you feel? Imagine how would you feel if this was about your child. This is not a hypothetical situation. In 2014, a new class of drugs came out on the market that could cure hepatitis C. Unfortunately, it cost $85,000 per patient. And at that price, there was no healthcare system across the world that could afford to treat everybody. So they had to prioritize patients. You see, hepatitis C or Hep C is a disease that attacks the liver. It takes sometimes years, but eventually it could turn into a liver cancer and require a liver transplant. Now, I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, the price was too high. Why don't we lower the price? And I agree, we should look at this. And prices went down by 30, 40, 50% and more. But in the past 5 years, we've only cured, depending on countries, between 15, 20, up to 30% of the population. Still, many are dying of the results of hepatitis C. Now, the interesting fact is that the price of the drug initially was deemed to be cost-effective, which means that this drug creates some savings down the road because we do not have to treat people for cancer and liver transplants if we can cure them today. So I think we don't really have a price point problem. I think we have a pricing model problem. I think the problem is not the number, but the unit by which we price. I think if we change the way we price this drug, we could potentially price over time. And if we do that, we could cure everybody today, have savings along the way because we don't need to cure people for cancers and liver transplant down the road, and use part of the savings to pay for the drug. If we do that, it could be a win-win-win solution. Win for the patients, win for the healthcare system because we could spend less, and win for the pharmaceutical company because we could still pay for the drug. Now, at this stage, I probably need to introduce myself. I am not a doctor. I am not a healthcare professional. I am a pricing professional. I have spent the last 20 years thinking about how to price products and services across sectors and across the world. And what I found is that in many circumstances, changing the pricing model, the unit by which we price things, could unlock a lot of value because it can increase the access to that product or service. For instance, if you buy a car and you buy cash up front, it can be very expensive. But if you buy it monthly with a lease or credit, many more people can afford to buy a car because it's not as expensive. Another example is with movies. We can now, with subscription services like Netflix, watch any movie we want, anytime we want. Now, the movie and drugs are unconventional comparisons, but they have similarities. Movies take a lot of talent and effort and cost to be produced, but once they are made, they are very cheap to be distributed over the internet. Drugs are a bit like that. They cost a lot of talent and effort in medical research and testing in order to find a new drug. But once it has been discovered and approved, distributing it to many patients can be quite cheap in comparison to the initial costs. The cost of the pills themselves is really not that much. So I believe we can invent a new pricing model for drugs, something I called the Netflix pricing model for drugs. And in this model, we could give the drug to everybody the same way we give access to all movies to everybody, and we would pay for the drug over time. If we do this, we could have the savings to pay for the drug. Now, to explain to you in more details about how this would work, let me show you a few charts. And what I like to illustrate with these charts is one, first, the usual pricing model, the per-patient pricing model that works for many other things wouldn't work and is flawed in that particular case, and how the Netflix model could solve the problem. So, who pays for the drug? The payers pay for the drug, and payers are either health insurance or national healthcare system. Let's take the perspective of a payer, and since they pay by getting savings, let's look at their costs over the next 10 years. Let's imagine we're focusing on a payer who is responsible for 100,000 patients. We could see all the costs arrayed here for all of the patients, from the red, people that will need liver transplants, to orange, people that might get cancer, to all the way on the yellow side, people that might not have any symptoms yet, and therefore there's not that much cost to treat them over the next 10 years. Now notice that we have more than 100,000 patients. It's because this is the situation before we have the cure, and because it is an infectious disease, it will spread and more patients will get it over time. Now the sum of all these costs, the red, the orange, the yellow, all of this sums up to $2 billion over the next 10 years. Now we have here a cost per patient, the price is per patient. Let's look at what happens when we start to buy the drug, and we charge, let's say, $85,000, which is the first price that was treated initially. If we treat 3,000 patients, and we start with the patients on the left, the ones who needed liver transplants, we're going to save all the green area, and we're going to cure them. But we're going to have to spend the blue area, a number of patients times the price per patient. And you could see on the right the blue area. And so we save $0.4 billion, but we only cure 2% of the population. This is not enough. Let's see what happens if we divide the price by 2. If we divide the price by 2, we have roughly the same amount of revenues for the drug company, but we have much more savings, but we only treat 7% of the population. Let's divide the price by 2 again. Now we treat more people, but not that many more. The revenues for the pharmaceutical company are bigger, and we have more savings. Everything goes in the right direction. Let's divide the price by 2 again. Now the revenues for the pharmaceutical company goes down. We still have cured only 24% of the population, and we have a lot of savings. Let's keep going, divide the price by 2 again, and you can see the revenues for the pharmaceutical company goes down, the savings goes up, but we only cure 30% of the population. If we divide by 2 the price again, it won't solve the problem. How far do we have to go? We have to go to a price where the revenues for the pharmaceutical company would be around 6% of the entire spend that we had before that. Think about this. Innovation, medical breakthrough, and only 6% of the money saved is used to pay for the drug. And this is not enough to either pay for all the research or encourage drug companies to come up with new drugs that could be breakthroughs. So we have a trade-off between treating everybody and the revenues for the drug company and paying for the drugs. I don't think this is right. The general strategy in that situation is to have a price that starts up and goes down. This is the way the pharmaceutical companies have priced this drug. This is also the way it works for movies. But when you have a price that goes down over time, it forces a choice on us about who are we going to treat. For movies, let's think about this. If you're a teenage boy and you just met a teenage girl and you want to invite her for the movies, is it worth to spend $20? Well, yes, of course. She might become your girlfriend. But if she is already your girlfriend, or if 10 years later you're married with her, is it worth paying $20? Well, no, maybe $3 is enough for a DVD rental. Let me translate this in healthcare terms. Is it worth, when the price has gone down, but might go down even further, treating patients today that might not have any symptoms because the price might go down by 20 or 30% 2 years from now? I think it is, but this is what would happen to the economics. We would spend more in blue and have a bit less savings. Now, is it worth trying to launch a broad campaign to identify all of the people that have hepatitis C but don't know it yet because they don't have any symptoms? If we do that, the cost is going to start to go up. Our savings are disappearing, and now the cost goes to more than $3 billion. Think about this. Now, $3 billion in blue means $3 billion with the current pricing model per patient that we need to pay today. The $2 billion was a cost over 10 years, which meant every year we paid roughly $200 million. That's an enormous amount of money, and very few payers can afford to do that. I think we should say yes to these questions. We should screen everybody. We should find these patients. We should treat them even if they don't have any symptoms. But in order to do this in an economical way, we need a different model. We need a model that doesn't force us to prioritize patients versus each other. We need a model that looks at all of the patients together. So let's look at the cost for this particular payer to take care of this 100,000 patients over the next 10 years. The overall cost for each of the segments, you can see, are people that will need liver transplants and cancer and are early stages of the disease. It goes up slightly over time because people get sicker, but it's a very stable cost over time. Now we have a cost over time, let's put a price on it. And here's the deal. The drug company could say, we're going to make as much drug available to the payer as you need to treat all the patients that you can identify. And we're going to treat them right away. And if we do that, you're going to save a lot of money in hospital costs that you will not have to pay. In exchange, you commit to pay us for the next 10 years the same amount of money, a subscription for the drug. And as soon as you identify more patients, you're going to be able to treat them no matter the number of patients that are going to be treated. It's going to be a fixed price. Now, note that in this model, I am not recommending the price points. I am not recommending whether the price should be high or low. I am just saying that pricing this way could solve the problem. It could solve the problem because it would now be possible to launch a broad campaign to screen all the population, identify people and treat them. We could cure 94% of the population. And if we cure 94% of the population, that means for 100,000 people that have hepatitis C today, 2,000 less deaths over the next 10 years. And of course, the hospital savings are pretty big, and we still can pay for the drug. Now, I am not saying this is easy. Any new pricing model requires time to change. Netflix didn't come out in 1 or 2 years, and this is the same thing for other industries. Many detailed questions need to be answered. For instance, what happens if this works in a multi-payer system? What happens if many different drugs are coming to the market at the same time? What happens if we have to change regulations? The fact is, we will need to solve these problems, and this needs to be things that are worked out between payers, drug companies, and regulators in order to make this work. But I can tell you this is possible, and this is worth it. We have here the different outcomes of what happens if we try to have a price per patient model. And the current trajectory today in our third column is one where in the next 10 years in many countries we will only treat 50% of the patients, and we have very few savings. Alternatively, with the new model, we could treat 94% of the patients, have almost $1 billion of savings, and still spend the same amount of money to encourage drug companies to come up with new drugs. Now, I only talked about hepatitis C, but there are many other drugs in clinical trials today for which that model could apply. Drugs that could cure hemophilia or help with hemophilia, hepatitis B, or cell therapies or gene therapies. Some of these drugs might cost more than $1 million per patient. But the pricing per patient model is not the right model. I believe a Netflix model would allow to make the drug available to all the people who need it. There's a simple way to know whether a drug could qualify for this new model. This is each time we hear someone ask the question, is this worth to treat you? Are you sick enough or not? If we hear that, I think we need to find a new solution. I think we need to cure entire populations. Thank you very much.